And welcome to the Today's Leader podcast, Building Tomorrow's Best Leaders Today. Please welcome Kurian Tharakan. Kurian, how are you?
Tony, thanks for having me on your show. I'm great. It's a little early for you down in Australia there this afternoon for me, so thanks for getting up so at this time. So it's going to be a real treat to be on your show.
My absolute pleasure. I love speaking with leaders right around the world, and my first leader that I've spoken to from Edmonton.
Oh, good.
So really, really excited. So to get started and to get the conversation rolling, Kurian, tell me a little bit about your background. So tell me the Kurian Tharakan story.
So I am a sales and marketing strategy consultant here in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, which is just above Montana, halfway across the world from Australia, of course. But I've been doing this for the past probably 35 years, something like that, easily. So I'm not as young as I look. I'm in my late 50s right now. And I stumbled my way into the kind of work I do right now. I started right out of university in sales positions. I was in commercial real estate leasing for a number of years, office leasing, retail leasing, got into corporate finance thereafter, buying companies, selling companies, raising capital for companies. That was probably single-handedly my absolute very best marketing experience because I saw a lot of boardrooms and got to see what was working and especially what wasn't working. Got into, ran the sales and marketing operations of an enterprise class software company for a little while. And then I eventually became a consultant. Isn't that what everybody does at some point in time in their life? If you don't, you should. And, I'm working with a lot of startups right now, especially out of the university. And what I'm finding is that most of these PhDs and engineers and scientists, they did not grow up or go to school to become a salesperson. But they have an invention now, they have an idea, and they are forced into a position where they have to go out and sell their idea, sell their invention to a public. So that's the kind of work I'm doing now to help these people come up with a process to actually move their ideas, companies, and products forward.
And it is a problem out there. People have technical skills, they've got professional skills, they're good at what they do, and they branch out into being the consultant, as everyone should. And we struggle to be that salesperson. We struggle to market who we are, what's unique about us, all of these individual things that take up a marketing message. So now you've written a book in relation to both, and you can encapsulate your book in so many ways. It's storytelling fundamentally, isn't it?
Fundamentally, it is about storytelling. It's called The 7 Essential Stories Charismatic Leaders Tell. And it's how anyone can move people and mountains as a result of using this very dead simple framework for telling stories that answer primal questions in your audience's head. And we can use this to brand yourself personally, brand your companies, create persuasive messaging for your organizations. It can be used in so many different ways. And ultimately, these are the same kind of stories that leaders throughout history, especially charismatic leaders, and the religions that they have perhaps come from. Charisma is often associated with not only politics, but it can be definitely associated with major religious figures and their ability to bring people together and move them forward. Well, all of these organizations, people, have mastered these 7 stories, which again answer 7 primal questions.
So what compelled you to jump into this particular niche? What was it?
Arrogance and ego. How's that? Believe it or not, this is an interesting thing. So I was in my mid-50s at that time, and I'd always thought I'd wanted to write a book. And so I got busy writing a book. And I hired a coach to help me, guide me through it, and a promotional team and all this kind of stuff. And I was out a significant amount of money in anticipation of a book being released. And at the end of it, I took a look at the book that I had in draft form that my coach and I had pulled together. And I looked at it, read a few chapters, and this was an absolute outpouring of everything I thought should have gone into a book. And I'm reading through this, Tony, and I'm thinking to myself, this is absolute crap. I can't put this out there. It'll make me look stupid. And I realized in that moment that the whole drive for me writing the book was completely offside. And it, for the wrong reasons, and I was not serving my audience. And what had happened along the way is that, I had a moments of inspiration. I just went back to that, and I tapped into those moments of inspiration, and I sat back, and I just wrote the book. Over the next 12 months, I just made myself do it. But I made myself do it from the perspective of, can I serve an audience? Is there something unique in the way that my perspective is going to deliver a method, a framework for people that I was working with that could use? And the book that I wrote was not the book I started writing. What I started writing was terrible. But what I ended up writing was a result of inspiration rather than ego drive to become an author, right? And it's a completely different product as a result of that.
There was a lot, like a lot of writers face resistance in their creative musings and their creativity. It's never good enough. When I wrote my first book, for example, the day that it went live everywhere around the world, I got so anxious about it that I was actually going to pull it, because it was just that whole fear of someone's going to read my book now. And it's no longer just this little piece of work that I'm working on. And so many writers feel that resistance as they're going through it. But it's probably a little bit different to have that self-doubt about what you're writing and then that honest appraisal of this is crap.
It was horrendous. It was absolutely horrendous. And the fear was, and I can tell you the fear in your case may have been projected. My fear was legitimate, because I would have looked like a complete fool if I'd put that book out there. But the book I ended up writing was a truly inspired set of chapters, and it flowed as a result of it. Everything just came together.
And that's always a good thing, isn't it? When we can get that flow happening with our creativity, it's a very positive state to be in. So how do you use what you've done with clients now?
The ultimate thing is that I had a client a couple of years ago that before I even finished the book, I used the framework to help build her brand DNA. And so what we did is I interviewed her over the course of 2 to 3 weeks, different sessions, maybe about 6, 7 sessions total, right? And I answered those 7 primal questions. And when you read it, and ultimately it was distilled down. And in fact, story 7 in my book is all about a meta-narrative that pulls together the previous 6 stories into a single telling. So that's what she ended up getting. That's the product she ended up getting. And if you read it, it's very clear why she started the company, what her ideals and values are, what her hopes for the future of her company, let alone her clients, and how she serves them, what she wants those transformative states to be, how she's different, why, that if they are going to be using the framework that she has, why they're going to win as a result of that. And with all those kind of things in 3 pages, she's got all of that there. Now, she can take that and populate a website. She can create collateral pieces of all sorts of kinds. And she can give it to a marketing team and say, this is who I am. This is who I serve. And this is why we are different.
Very authentic from a marketing space to be able to share.
Yeah, very. And I think in a lot of ways, Tony, that many organizations start accidentally. I run into so many accidental entrepreneurs, and they thought it was going to be a lot easier than what they find themselves in. And what they forget is that they lose their way in the process, right? And now they have a little baby dragon that, the bigger they get, the more it wants to be fed. And they are maybe even borrowing to feed the cash burn that the dragon wants to eat, right? And so even a small company, you use $5,000, $10,000, $30,000, $40,000 while you're growing a month. You're trying to feed this little baby dragon, and it keeps eating. So until you get ahead of the purpose of why you created this company first, you run a real risk of losing that authenticity. I had a client of mine a few years back, and he just a complete mess of an organization, losing money, partnership disputes, all these kinds of things. And I asked him, why did he start this company? And he said, what? I wrote that down one time. I wrote that down one time, and he pulled out a one sheet of paper from that he had written about 10 years earlier, and I read it, and it was so compelling and so alive with potential and purpose and imagination that I said, where did this company go? Because that's not the company we're looking at right now. Where did this company in this one pager go? And eventually what we did, we had to blow up the first firm, and we recreated the firm that he wanted to build to begin with.
Yeah. So was it the case that that they lost sight of the vision or what that original purpose was, and they got ground down in the day-to-day reality of what running an organization is all about?
Well, the vision became, not what was on the paper, which was so compelling. The vision became, how do I feed my dragon? They keep wanting to eat. It was 20 grand last month, now 35 grand this month, and it just keeps going like that. And there doesn't seem to be any way out because you borrowed now to feed the dragon. So you just can't just leave, right? So missions change because the original purpose was lost, and now the mission becomes just to survive.
And I'm sitting here listening to your speciality, let's call it that, storytelling, and I'm seeing the very clear link back into marketing authenticity. I don't think as organizations here in Australia we do that as effectively as what we potentially can. Now, I mean, every business has a story. But what I'm also seeing, and it's, I know this is something that you talk about as well, it's the concept of it's the concept of the personal brand. And many organizations face difficulties when it comes to culture and people aligning to the leader. And if you talk to, I'd imagine, a sample pool of people, there would be a very large disconnect within that sample of people with who their current leader is. And I'd imagine that there is a real link to, the development of the personal brand, the development of the stories, as you talk to, in that alignment back to the leader. Is that work that you do as well?
It has to be. If the leader and the organization and its products and services are not aligned, then that inauthenticity will become very evident quite quickly.
Yeah.
And we take a look at even if you take a look at some really prominent examples. So Jeff Bezos today, the 190 billion dollar man, created Amazon from nothing. And, Amazon is what it is for a lot of different reasons. But what people are questioning now is, what hath Jeff Bezos begat? And because now it's a monster. It is a monster threatening to eat up, the local businesses for a variety of reasons. You can say it's a lack of innovation on the local companies' parts as well. But, Bezos is now spending his billions going to space. And people are questioning the authenticity of, even though he's a self-made billionaire, whether his whole mission, his sense of being, his purpose, should be indulged, or should we tax away his $190 billion, and do some real good back here on Earth rather than in orbit or suborbit, as it may be, around the planet Earth. Excellent.
So many leaders are told from their mentors within organizations that, things like you've got to fake it till you make it. You can't show cracks in your veneer. You've got to have this leadership facade. You've got to be strong. You've got to give off the appearance that you know what you're doing. And a lot of that, fundamentally in my eyes, is just really poor mentoring. It's really poor advice. So what advice would you give to those aspirational leaders that want to be tomorrow's best leaders? How can they utilize what you do to help create that best leader of tomorrow scenario?
I think it's so simple. I do a lot of speaking, especially at the university, new grad classes, things like that. And it's always surprising me, and yet it shouldn't, because I was probably exactly that way when I was graduating. So I'm looking for the perfect move. They're looking for the perfect move. Perfect career, perfect salary, perfect career path, perfect whatever it is that they're doing. And there is no such thing. There is only you showing up and using some very practical tools. The first thing is show up. First thing is show up.
That's a good place to start.
What surprises a lot of these young kids is that when I tell them that the number one character trait that I have when I was being hired out of university, why people came to me in my career path, for me to represent their products and things like that, the number one reason was I showed up on time. If the meeting was 3 p.m., I'd show up. I'd be there at 3 p.m., and I'd be ready to go, right? And that's a character trait. It is an absolute assumption that you're smart. If you weren't, you wouldn't be hired. It's an absolute assumption that you have to be honest. Otherwise, they would, on it goes. But character traits like diligence and resilience and grit and, get things done and look after your client, those kind of things are not necessarily part of everybody's experience with everybody else. So you're showing up with those kind of things. But the next part of that, to answer your question, is, what can these aspirational leaders do? First of all, just the idea that you are a leader, period, no matter what you're doing. If you are a leader, you're a leader at all times. And sometimes leaders follow, but they follow in a leader-like way. They follow in a way that helps the existing leader. You can't be, the finance guy and the HR person and the operations expert. So as the HR person, you might have to follow the leadership of the operations person in that topic. So you need to know how to follow as well. But that's an aspect of leadership. Probably the simplest way to do this, though, the most powerful way to do this, is to recognize that there isn't very much that's absolutely brand new. Somebody's done it before you. Somebody's been in exactly the situation that you've been in, and there was a way to do it, which is why I'm such a big fan of history. Big fan of history. I love history, reading about what people did in different situations and such. But there's a history in your organization as well. So you got to find a mentor, or even look for examples of people that have been in your position, in your situation, and look at what they've done to either succeed or fail, because there's lessons in both.
And from a very clear understanding for myself, the concept of authenticity and finding truth in the past and the historical aspect of organizations is once again just one of those strong messages that you're sending here, Kurian. So inauthentic leaders, to me, always they're the ones looking for that quick option. They're the ones that are looking for the golden nugget, the secret behind what leadership is, and then people follow them. And I really like the concept that you've got to show up, because at the end of the day, in my language, I always say a leader's always on show. So if you're showing up and you're very much aware that you are on show, people are going to admire and acknowledge those traits much more than a leader who's the fair weather leader, the one that's in front of people. They're charismatic, but in behind closed doors, they're dark and deep and nasty. So that finding truth in the historical and the authentic stories in which we tell is something that's absolutely compelling. So who's inspired you in your leadership journey?
I think a lot of different people have, both young and older and historical. It's not a specific individual per se, but it is about stories of character. That's what stories of character. If you throughout the book, I repeat story after story after story of individuals that have been tried, and they've been resilient in the process, or they've learned something in the process and such. Right. So there's so many different people. I have a young man that I just promoted in my digital marketing agency. So I have an investment in a little digital marketing agency in town here called Socialite Communications. And we have a young fellow, and he's 25 years old. He is single-handedly and hopefully he's not listening to this, because it'll go to his head. But he is single-handedly the most naturally talented salesperson that I've met. And you would never guess that he has the sales type of skills because it's so smooth and so natural, and it's so evident in his actions. Now, that's not what impresses me. Because I've met lots of people like that, not necessarily at that age, but I've met lots of people like that. What impresses me is that he has risen to the occasion over the last 2.5 years, where we promoted him to director of growth for our company. And he's building a sales team and such. He shows up. He's always up and bright and ready to go, positive attitude. And he is biting down hard on the sales mentorship that we've given him. So we've hired sales coaches and a sales program and this isn't one of these things I'll just wing it. He has bitten down. He's chomping hard on the curriculum and taking advantage of the mentors we've got him. And he's running the show on a not magic incantation, but on a step-by-step build the structure process. So there's an example of where I've learned that, anybody can do this, but it's not based on something that is just miraculous. It's based on putting in the blocks step by step and building that structure brick by brick. So there's an example of somebody, that I've known for 2.5 years. That's it. Then you can go to the big examples. You can go to big examples like Churchill and Edward Jenner, when he was doing the vaccines and such. And there's all sorts of examples of what people do. But ultimately, it comes down to this one thing: character.
Yeah. And I'm hearing and I'm sensing the word attitude in there as well, which is a large part of our character.
Yeah.
It's certainly not that wing it. And, I used to call my speaking style very much a wing and waffle. So I'd wing it, I'd waffle. So, and when I was in the corporate space, it wasn't necessarily such a bad thing, because to be able to speak off the cuff is really what leaders can really help align their people. But when it comes to standing on stage in front of a paying audience and delivering a keynote of 40 minutes, winging it and waffling just doesn't cut it. It doesn't cut the mustard. So
people sniff you out real quick.
They certainly do. So in respect of that, let's just take a little bit step. I've just thought of touching back into the story scenario. So you were talking about story 7, which is the one that brings them all together, the meta story, I think you called it.
Meta-narrative, yeah.
Yeah. So what is that the most powerful story that people have, or is there another one that's going to evoke more emotion?
We've been talking about culture as well. Let me just tell you how the book is set up. The first half of the book is all about culture. It's all about the 7 primary pillars of culture. And then the second half of the book is all about the 7 stories you infuse into the culture to make it come alive. Okay? So that culture is the always-on operating system that rewards behavior even when there's no one around to reward or punish that behavior. People just know what to do.
Gotcha.
They just know what to do. So then but now when you infuse it with these 7 primal stories, people have a clearer sense of purpose, vision, mission, and they understand their identity and values and beliefs and all those kinds of things. And that's what gets that organization moving faster than any one individual could do on their own.
Yeah.
Because you don't want a leader's primary role is to make other people come alive in their purpose. Now, that's what it's about. And when you do that, you can harness the energies of everybody and not just have to pull the organization forward on your own merit. So the 7 primary stories, though, if we take a look at it, there's a fellow by the name of Regis McKenna. And Regis McKenna in the 70s was Steve Jobs' first marketing consultant. Way back when.
Okay.
And Regis had a line that said, "Great marketing takes its cues from great religion." And if you think about it, there's been thousands of religions throughout human history, modern human history, right? Which is maybe 100 to 200,000 years. And the history is only about 5,000, written history anyways, right?
Yeah.
But throughout that time, you have to ask yourself, why do we have such prominent religions today like Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, very small but still around, and on it goes. Why is that? Well, because Their stories keep them alive. Now, you can also say that it's part of the deities that they worship and things like that. But, ultimately, the only way you and I can communicate with each other is through the stories we tell. So the more powerful your stories, the more magnetic whatever it is that you are talking to the audience about. So the very first story, this may not surprise you, is creation and origin. How did this come about? What was the inciting incident? What drew us all together? Story number 2 is all about our identity, values, and beliefs. Who are we as people? What do we believe in? What are our highest aspirations? What will we never violate? What we will always aspire to in principles. Story 3 is about the big idea. And the big idea is a central organizing principle that binds everything else that we do together. And there doesn't have to be just one idea. There can be multiple big ideas. But ultimately, they come together to form a complex of stories that reinforce each other. And if you read through the Bible, for example, all those stories reinforce each other. There aren't any contradictory stories. You see what I'm saying?
Gotcha.
So those stories are part of a storyplex, a meme-plex, and they are allowed now the entirety of all those big ideas to come together. Story 4 is all about the enemy we face. And the enemy we face can be something we fight for or we fight against. So it doesn't have to be a person, right? So we can fight for adult literacy. We can fight against childhood poverty. And both of those things are valid. But when you have an enemy, an enemy can be just a challenge. It can be a person. It can be a hurricane. It can be Hurricane Ida, just hit the east coast of the U.S. this last week. And that's the challenge, right? And when we have that, we have a polarizing figure, a polarizing entity that we can then direct our efforts towards. And that's why you have to have the enemy we face story. Story number 5 is all about the mighty winds. And the mighty winds in this case are all about the big macro trends in the environment. And what I say is that all organizations, companies are like a sail ship. And sailing ships, for the most part, they need wind to power their sails. And, and without wind, you're going to be dead in the water. Now, most entrepreneurs build the ship without ever ascertaining the direction, availability, or power of the wind. And so you might even build the wrong kind of ship, let alone the wrong style or whatever it is, right? You're building a racing schooner when you should be building a cargo boat. It's that kind of thing. And then, you may not have wind to power. So the wind we're talking about are things like societal trends, technological trends, environmental, economic, political, and legislative trends. And these trends are long-term trends. So if you take a look at in the late 40s, for example, the transistor was slowly replacing the vacuum tube. And by the 1960s, 50s, 60s, the transistor was forming into the integrated circuit. And the integrated circuit became the microprocessor. And then it keeps going. The first calculator based on a microprocessor was released, I think, in the early 1970s. And then came microcomputers. And then it just keeps going on and on and on. And that is why Jeff Bezos has $190 billion today, because all of that led to the internet. And all of that led to the World Wide Web. And all of that led to all these companies creating massive amounts of wealth in their opportunities and massive tidal waves of destruction in the process as well. Because I remember walking into steno pools in the 1970s with the IBM Selectric clacking away. All these people clacking away. There's stenographers doing that, doing the dictation and transcribing that. Where's the IBM Selectric today? In a museum. Now, fortunately, IBM has other tricks up their sleeves, right? But that was washed away by the fact that the microprocessor allowed word processors to take place. And then, right up to today with the internet, you can go on to Google Docs for free. And no one takes it down to a typist anymore. I used to take my term paper to a typist. No one does that anymore. So it's destroyed entire industries and created absolutely new ones in the process. Tidal waves of destruction, tsunamis of opportunities. Story 6. How are we doing here so far?
No, you're going well. I'm loving it.
Story 6 is that.
I'm actually loving the stories within the story. So I think you've got really quite a unique, compelling way of speaking about what it is that you do.
Tony, the only way you and I can communicate properly and where I can inspire you and compel you and give you and the aspect of my imagination where it can be part of your vision as well is through a story. If I give you a whole bunch of random facts, no one cares, even if the facts are correct. No one cares. But when you infuse those facts with meaning, now you make things come alive. And so in the U.S., it's probably very true down in Australia as well, certainly true in Canada. We have different political stripes who view the same set of facts but come up with completely different meanings and then result in results in different political movements. And such. Same set of facts. You know, we have all these debates about vaccines right now. Well, when did that become a debate? Edward Jenner was vaccinating people in the 1700s. You know, when did the vaccine, which triumphed over polio and smallpox and so many other things and eradicated these debilitating, murdering diseases? When did the vaccine become a problem? You know, when did we lose trust in science? Well, I don't know, but that is a result of the stories we tell. So, the first 5 stories, if those stories are true, they are the left-hand side of the equation. And then we have a little equal sign. If those stories are true, if they are believable, then this is the journey we must undertake, which is story 6. Here's the journey we must undertake. It's an absolute equation at that point in time. And then finally, story 7 is the why we will win story. And the why we will win story, that's the meta-narrative. It takes the previous 6 stories, puts it together in a nice short frame of time, and then infuses it with what we call keystones. And keystones ensure the win. And keystones from history, you will recall, will be things like superior technology, superior God, right? That's the Israelite story, all throughout the Old Testament, superior God. We have superior people, superior strategy. It can be death ground. If we don't do it, we're going to die. So, then the story to illustrate that one, in 1519, Hernan Cortez, who was, how old was he? He was probably 29, something like that. He wasn't very old. Fled Cuba with 630 men. And he fled Cuba, and the governor of Cuba, who was Diego Velázquez, his brother-in-law, to conquer the Mexican Empire, the Aztec Empire for himself, and get the glory for himself. And Diego wanted the same thing. So Hernan Cortez fled in the middle of the night with 630 men. He picked up a few men from other islands, went over to Veracruz in Mexico, and he landed there. And he scuttled some of his ships, and he sent a couple back home, and he gave his men a blunt promise. And the blunt promise was this: look, back there, we've mutinied, and there's certainly the certainty of death, because we are going to face mutiny charges. But ahead of us, there are 5 million Aztecs and 200,000 square kilometers of territory. 5 million Aztecs. Now, he gave his people, 630 men, a compelling story and the keystone of death ground. If we don't do this, we are going to die. And 2 years later, in 1521, through the help of not only this powerful vision of what they could do, and also the help of his allied Indian forces, who also did not like the Aztecs, and also the assistance of a few things called pandemic type of diseases like smallpox, which the Spaniards were somewhat impervious to, not completely, but certainly not. The indigenous people hadn't even seen it, so it wiped out whole swaths of them. Some say up to 90% of those that were infected, right, were wiped out. Well, 2 years later, in 1521, the Aztec Empire fell to Cortez and his allied forces. And, I don't want to talk about the morality of colonialism or imperialism or anything like that, but it tells you the power of a compelling story, because unless he could rally his troops right then and there would be no conquest of the New World.
Interesting. It's, it is. It's that concept of the compelling story that really, really drives each and every one of us forward. So in so many ways, it's the story that we're telling ourselves. It's plotting out the path that we have in life, whether it's a good path or whether it's a negative path. And we've just got to find that compelling story that's going to drive us forward. So tell me a little bit about your relationship with failure. So you talked a little bit about your initial book, which gave me an indicator of how you operate through failure, but how would you describe your relationship with failure?
It's a complex relationship. because one of the things that I find myself coaching young entrepreneurs through is not only their business model, but also their own sense of self-esteem and confidence and fear and things like that. And one of the things I tell them is that there's only two types of fear. There's not one type of fear. There are actually two types of fear. The very first kind of fear is real fear. Now, real fear is the lion is in front of you, it's hungry, and it will eat you unless you run. Okay, that might not save you.
That fear is a good fear.
Great
from
fear.
What
The second kind of fear is a projected fear. And the projected fear is what if I did this? I'm going to look like a fool. I'm going to look like an idiot, things like that. By the way, that fear of mine with the first book was absolutely real fear, because that was an absolute disaster of a draft. Let me tell you, that was real fear. I can't put this out here. Now, the projected fear will kill you. And in fact, most of our decisions are not based on real fear. They're based on projected fear and projected greed and projected emotions of all sorts and kinds. So one of the techniques that I give them is to get them into a spot where they can see what the process forward is and what it will result in, even if it is going to result in whatever. It doesn't matter. So one of the techniques I give them is imagine your absolute worst outcome, whatever that is, whatever your worst outcome is. And this can be applied to anything, not just business models. This can be applied to your marriage. It's entirely possible. Right? What is the worst outcome? And because people are so afraid of the worst outcome, they shy away from doing anything about it. They just sort of touch it, and poke at it. They got to dive into it. What I get them to do is to imagine the worst thing happening. Your worst outcome is happening, and I get them to imagine it in all of its senses. Visual, hearing, feel, your stomach, all these kind of, and then I make them do it again and again and again and again. And I keep running them at 180 miles an hour into that brick wall of fear over and over again until it loses power.
Yeah.
And it's only at that moment of where it loses power that you can see beyond that brick wall of fear. Right. And you see that, if that does happen, then, because all these emotions now have been dissipated. Okay, you've experienced all the emotions, and it can get quite boring near the end of this. I make them do it over and over and over again, right? And then, once you expire with all of that, then what happens is that you can see beyond that fear, and what lies beyond your fear is really your best life. Your best life lies beyond your fear.
So, what's the vision for you going forward, Kurian?
I want to My ex-wife and I, who lives 3 floors above me in my condo here, we still do a lot. We still have a business together. We still have a lot of things. We sponsor actually a prize in entrepreneurship, and I work at the university, and I certainly work with a lot of new entrepreneurs and such. So my hope in the next, I'm in my late 50s now. My hope in the next, 30 years, I think I got another 30 good years left. Right? Is to just build a legacy of entrepreneurial success stories where I've coached them or I've invested in them or whatever have you. Or they've subscribed to some kind of course I've put out, things like that. But I want to enable as many entrepreneurs to get to their best place in that next 30 years, one way or the other. So I want my name to be associated with that legacy of entrepreneurship.
Excellent. And that concept of legacy is one that drives so many people forward, that how do I give, how am I going to be remembered? What legacy do I want is often quite a good starting point. Do I want to be known as the hard ass that was always in the office working away, or do I want to be known as someone that gave willingly, that was generous, is encouraging, those sorts of things? So I think that concept of legacy is absolutely real and absolutely motivating. So how can so tell me about how the book is going, and then I guess, Kurian, how can people make contact with you?
Sure. We put out the book last year, so we've probably had maybe 6,000 downloads of the book on the Kindle copy and such. That's why it's very inexpensive. It's available on Amazon all over the world. And I get a royalty check from Amazon Australia every so often, believe it or not. And it's very inexpensive. It's $3.49 US, right? It's not very expensive. I just want to get the framework and the stories out there. And so the book is good, and I love being a guest on podcasts like yours where we have insightful questions. It's a great conversation, right? And I think this whole idea of the book was when I realized it's not about me, it's about you, as in you, the entrepreneur, and being able to use a dead simple framework to help enliven your business. That's when it all changed for me. And so if I can get this book into more and more people's hands so they can get that going, then that's what I want to do. If you come to my website, though, strategypeak.com, I'll send this to you for your show notes, Tony. You can download a couple of chapters of the book and a free infographic as well. So it'll give you the 7 stories in an infographic form. But I'll tell you what, for the first 5 of your listeners that tell me that they heard me on your show, I'll send them a free Kindle copy of the book.
Excellent. Then that's something to grab. That certainly is.
Only 5 copies, though. Just 5 copies.
Only 5 copies. So fundamentally, Kurian, it's really piqued my interest about, the 7 pillars of culture and how it links with the 7 stories. So I might have to get you on another time to talk about those 7 pillars of culture. So because
let's do that. I'd love to come back.
And culture is so important for organizations. So connect through strategypeak.com. Do you encourage people to connect with you on LinkedIn?
Yeah, so if they tell me that they heard about me through your show, and I will definitely connect with them, right? So, absolutely.
Excellent. Yeah. Excellent. So, Kurian, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. Thank you so much for investing in the leaders of today.
Tony, thank you very much.